everyone. My name is Lisa Maynard and I'm an Improvement Advisor with the Quality Improvement Support Team at the Care Inspectorate. The purpose of this video is to share the basic steps of improvement planning with you. We'll go through the model for improvement, the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle and how to apply this in a real-life example for the children and young people workforce. At the end of the video, I'll also explain where you can find further information to support your work. One of the most important features of improvement work is that it's for everyone at all levels of the organisation. Anyone can come up with a great idea to improve the service, and they don't have to necessarily be the one who carries it out. As a team, we should work collaboratively to figure out the best way forward and use all the skills available to us in our group. We should listen to and include the voice of children and young people as we work with them to make the changes. The method that we use to do this within the Care Inspectorate is the model for improvement. The reason it's been chosen is because it's simple to use and can be applied to any size of project. The model asks 3 questions and is then followed by the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle. Let's go through each part in turn now. The first question in the model asks, what are we trying to accomplish? This means that you should have a very clear idea of what it is you want to improve and to be able to write this as an aim. To establish the problem that you're trying to improve, it's best practice to work on this as a group with your staff and children and young people. What's the top priority for the service? How can we drill this down into a realistic aim? Some tips for writing a good aim is to use SMART thinking. SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and timely. Later on in the video, I'll go into this in more detail and provide a good example of an aim. Aims should be agreed upon by everyone involved in the project so that it's very clear what you're working towards. It also provides momentum and focus for everyone as you work on your projects. The second question in the model for improvement says, how will we know that a change is an improvement? In order to know, we must measure. This means that we need to gather evidence that our change is working. In future videos, we'll also talk about this in terms of the self-evaluation process. The data you collect here for your improvement aim doesn't need to be complicated. Data for improvement is not auditing data. It's purely to let you know how the system is functioning at the current time. You can use a method as simple as an emoji chart to collect feedback on young people's moods and energy levels, for example, or use a tick sheet to look at medication errors. As long as it works for you and your team, it's fine. What's most important about data is that those who are doing the data collecting all do it in the same way and consistently. The most important type of data you need to begin with is called baseline data, which shows how the same issue is operating before you make any changes. So for example, if you wanted to look at restraint data, you might look at the data already held by yourselves, or look at national statistics, or data from services around you. This is your baseline, and you can use this to show what you're either trying to match or improve upon. Throughout your improvement project, it's very important that you collect data, either numerical data or through feedback from people's own words. The last question in the model asks, what changes can we make that will result in an improvement? These are called your change ideas. When the aim is first agreed upon, it could be useful to ask your teams to brainstorm as many changes they can think of to achieve this. It's unlikely that your project will only require making one change. You'll want to try out lots of different things to achieve your aim. As we can see, the model consists of 2 main parts. The 3 questions are the thinking and the planning stage. So just to go through those again. What are we trying to accomplish, which is your aim? How will we know that a change is an improvement? That's your measures. And what changes can we make that will result in an improvement? Those are your change ideas. The PDSA cycle is when you actually put it into practice. That's the doing part. You'll continuously go through both as you work on your improvement project. What's most important is to have a good plan so that anyone looking in can understand what you're trying to do, and which will capture hearts and minds of anyone involved in the project. This is the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle, or PDSA. For this, you would take one of your change ideas and plan how you're going to run it. For example, how long should it last? Who's responsible for taking measures and for carrying it out? What do we think might happen? The do is when we put it into action and observe what's happening and take our measures. We then study by looking at the measures and finding out what impact the change has had. What do we need to change, stop doing, or continue with? Finally, we come back to act. Now that we know what we know, how shall we run the next cycle? Remember that improvement is for learning. You don't need to continue on with something that isn't working. It's okay for plans to not go as you'd expect, as long as you learn from them and try something different the next time. Just grab that momentum you've created amongst your staff group and young people and keep going. These repeated PDSA cycles are sometimes called rapid cycles of change. Improvement should be fairly rapid. We don't stick with ideas that aren't working. Instead, we try something new. Everyone will be more engaged in the changes if they can see their part in it, and it will help them to feel empowered. Here, we are trying to get away from the traditional model of making improvements. This is when only a select few become decision makers, and they might shut themselves away to design the change. They'll implement it into practice, with frontline workers, children and young people having little to no say on the approach, which may not then be suitable. And it's been implemented at great cost and unlikely to change. The improvement science approach. Changes are made and created alongside those who will benefit from the change. Design is undertaken together, tested and changed continuously throughout the PDSA cycles until everyone is happy. Only then is it fully implemented. To give a real-life example, I wanted to share a project that was recently completed for Children and Young People Services, in which I was tasked to find out what good means for personal planning. It's very important that you're able to evidence to others why you're making the changes. It will help people become enthused about the need to do so, and it also helps if you're trying to gather funding or specialist support. In this case, the change was being made because we had specific guidance on what personal plans should be, how this related to the health and social care standards and the promise. For your own work, you may reference both of these, plus any feedback given to you in recent scrutiny activity for requirements or areas for improvement to feed into your improvement planning. Clearly setting out why your project is needed is crucial to engage others. You should always know why the project will improve outcomes for children and young people and be able to demonstrate that. Anyone involved in the project will then be motivated to help. Now let's revisit the aim from the model for improvement. I mentioned earlier that this should set out very clearly what the project aims to do using SMART principles. So let's look at S for specific. If I read out my aim, by the end of 2019, 100 children and young people and their workers across Scotland will have given feedback to the Care Inspectorate on their personal plans. We can tell from this very clearly what my intention was. For this project, I had two aims, one concerning the feedback I was to seek out, and the other regarding testing it out later on. Moving on to measurable. In the first aim, I'm stating that I'll talk to 100 children and young people and their workers. In the second, I have said that 90% of young people in the test area will be confident. These are my measures. Regarding achievable, this is something that you need to reflect upon yourself as you work through the plan. For example, if I had assumed I'd be able to speak to 300 young people and workers and later had to change it to 100, I'd be acknowledging my original aim was not achievable. And it's the same for the R for realistic. The aim that I'd chosen fit in well with the project I'd been asked to do, and I was confident I could achieve it. This is why you should always take note of your aim and review it from time to time with your teams. And lastly, is the aim timely? The project must have an end date. This sets a clear target for everyone, and also increases motivation to get it done within that time. So remember, use SMART thinking: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and timely. Let's look at measurements now for the second question in the model for improvement. How do we know that a change is an improvement? As well as gathering the main measures as we just saw in the aim, I had to think about anything else I might want to measure. For this, I used something called the family of measures. The outcome measure is the one that shows the overall aim of the plan as discussed earlier. The process measure is about looking at the system. What's changing within the system when the plan is carried out? Here, I needed to make sure that when I chose a test area, the staff involved engaged with the meetings. And lastly, balancing measures looked at whether there are any unintended consequences from doing this project. I considered whether or not this would be more stressful for staff to undertake changes, or whether their confidence would improve over time. Your own balancing measure might be something like, how much time is staff spending doing this project that's taken away from other tasks? That's just one example. You don't need to use the family of measures in your project, but it can be useful for figuring out different parts of the system. The only one you absolutely must have is the outcome measure, as this is the one that will impact children and young people in your overall aim. Lastly, here are some of my change ideas. I wanted to create a survey for children and young people to get their feedback. I wanted to make sure I spoke to young inspection volunteers, our inspection colleagues, and asking services to send us some example plans. I also went out on a few inspections to see how plans were working within the service. Each of these took place under different PDSA cycles of change to achieve the overall aim. I must stress again that the model for improvement can be used for any size of project. Although this one is quite large that I've given you and involves going out with one service, you're able to use the same planning methods for any small project, from improving how young people's views are acted on in the service, or perhaps to figure out a method for the safe administration of medication, for example. Think about what you want to do first. What's the top priority in all the change ideas you've came up with, and how are you going to go about it? First of all, gathering evidence. For my baseline data, I had to see what kind of plans were already out there in homes. I contacted services and asked them to send me anonymised plans so I could compare and contrast to find out what worked and what didn't. More evidence gathering, this time by collecting feedback from young people, workers, inspectors and young inspection volunteers. I mainly used focus groups using the Champions Board network, but if you're working within your own services, you may prefer one-to-one informal chats or house meetings to do this. What's most important is that you actually listen to and work with your young people and staff. These are the 3 questions I asked every young person I spoke to across Scotland. It's important to develop your questions beforehand so that the evidence is strong. Using the same questions across everyone you speak to ensures consistency and that you have data that you can actually work with. You also want to make sure that you're asking the right questions. Question your project, find out what it is that you need to know, and don't just ask questions for the sake of it. Collecting and analysing the data came next. I asked everyone to either contribute to whiteboards or to write on post-its. To theme these, I just had to put them into groups or use coloured pens to theme them into sections. When you notice the same feedback occurring again and again, you know you have a large enough sample of people to work with and you can stop collecting. Here are some of the observations I collected while gathering the feedback. As you can see, they all cover the same broad themes and showed me I was on the right track in finding out what children and young people really thought. Providing quotes can make your work much more powerful. If you were to display some key quotes in an open area, or to provide them in a report, the real opinions of children and young people are much more interesting and powerful to read than dry data, and reassures others that you've genuinely wanted to consider their views. So here were the conclusions from my first aim in gathering feedback. This time, the feedback is from everyone, not just young people. It turned out that everyone involved wanted the same and the best for young people. It provided a strong basis for the new personal plans guidance. So let's go through these. Everyone wanted plans which were person-centred, written in plain English and used sensitive language towards children and young people. They should be creative with a child-friendly design, accessible for all, safe and fit for purpose, and contain meaningful outcomes. This is just to show you how the feedback was included in the final personal plans guidance. The quotes from the young people are on almost every page, backing up the evidence which sits underneath. We also have the health and social care standards weaved throughout to show how relevant they are. When you're doing your own improvement projects, I recommend that you try to do the same. Really show how the evidence and practice meet. So now that I'd done several cycles of change, I could think about moving on to the next one to achieve the overall aim. So far, I had gathered the feedback, contributed to the report, and then afterwards, I was about to start contacting services to find a test area to practice the feedback on. I hope this has been a useful presentation and seeing how systematic planning using the model for improvement can help you develop your own change ideas. We're hoping to do more videos in due course on different aspects of improvement planning. Here are some web links where you can find further information in the meantime, and you will also find my email address on the first slide of this presentation. I wish you much success in your own improvement projects.